Welcome and thank you for your attendance for our session today. We want to talk about the unique partnership between the head of school and the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. So please note that anytime you see CDEIO, it's because that title is way too long to say over and over and over again. I am Karen Bradberry. I am Galloway's new Chief CDIO. And I am here today with two of my colleagues, and I will allow them to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their roles. We'll go to my head of school first, of course. So James.
Hey, hello everyone. My name is James Cayedos White. I'm the head of school here at the Galloway School. I'm in my third year here in Atlanta. Before this, I was the head of the school in Kentucky, and before that, I was out in Phoenix and Boston, New York. So I've been at independent schools for 20 plus years now in a variety of different roles. I'm super excited to be here at this school, working with these incredible educators. So I hope that what we have to share today gives you some sense of the work that we're doing, and also it gives you some ideas of what you might be able to do at your own places. So really appreciate having you all here today. And then I will turn it over to Felicia Mccrary.
Good morning. My name is Felicia Mccrary. I am, my title is Director of Student Life. I call myself Chief Adolescent Strategist. This is my 24th year at the Galloway School. I have been in one building, but in multiple different schools. As far as the number of iterations and ways that Galloway has changed. I started as a world history teacher, was the assistant principal of the high school, and then moved into this role a couple of years ago. So very excited to be a part of this presentation this morning.
So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to James to do just a little preview of our purpose and our plan, and then we will get started.
Sure. So the plan today is really to talk about the relationship between the session is really about the relationship between the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, depending on what you have that title or what the title is at your own schools, and the head. But what we're going to do is we're going to walk you through kind of some of the things that we think of in terms of why DEI, how, what, and then the who piece of this, and specifically looking at how this work. There is no such thing as right or wrong. There is no such thing as a straight path. There is, nuance to this. There is culture to this. There is school dynamics to this. There's personality to this in terms of the work, how it gets done, how effective it is, and those kinds of things. And so what we're here today is to walk you through kind of a framework in terms of how we think about it. And so we really hope that you can take some of these pieces of the framework, tie them back to where you are and what you do and the relationships that you have within your own school to strengthen this work. Because the reality of while there is no right or wrong, there's also no not. Meaning that we do not have the choice of not doing this work. If the world has shown us anything in the past 18 months, is that this work is needed more now than ever. And so the question for us is not, that you have to do it a certain way. The question really is about how are you going to do it? And we hope that the things that we share with you today give you some jumping off points in terms of thinking about it, because we also understand that it has to meet the needs of your school and where you are. Not, schools are in very different places across the country in terms of this work and where they are. Heads are in different places. I talk to heads of schools all the time, and I can tell you right now, there are some who, they are lamenting the fact that we're even having to have these conversations. And then there are some who are really trying to dig in and figure out how they can make their schools be better. And then there's everything in between. And so, we want to be real with you in terms of the work that we're doing, but also to recognize that just because we're doing it and doing it a certain way does not mean that it will necessarily fit into your scheme of things. So we hope, again, that we give you some sense of how you might be able to look at this work differently and from some different angles to help your school move forward, because our schools do not have the choice of not moving forward on this work.
Yeah, and I'll just echo or extend a little bit on James's, what James has said, to also talk about how much we have learned and how much we have grown because of sharing these stories with each other. And so if you haven't connected, I see some names of people who are definitely, hey, in my network of hey, how do you do this? people are asking, how do we start affinity groups? Why should we do it or whatever? So part of what really drove us is in wanting to share out is we really want to pay it forward and sort of dedicate a lot of this to understanding that we know we're standing on the backs of and standing in concert with so many others who are really committed to doing DEI work in our schools. So with that, I'll do a couple of housekeeping and then we'll jump in. So we sort of laid out the 4 big chunks, if you will, because of the time frame and because of the richness of the content. We are going to be a little bit more intentional about facilitating chat opportunities because we are trying to reserve a pocket of time at the end to really allow for some rich and meaningful question answer discussion time. And so you'll hear us, facilitating to use the chat feature. So please, with 3 of us being here, we are all going to take turns monitoring it all the time, looking for, if there's a pressing theme or development, we will certainly pause and attempt to address that. But for you, if there's a question that you have and you don't want to lose it, feel free to drop it in the chat. We will actually have time at the end. We have told ourselves we will to allow for some rich discussion. The other thing that I'll just mention that I didn't necessarily include in here, given our professional roles and the assumed professional roles of those of you who are participating, are obviously our conversational principles, our guiding principles for conversation. And so I'm going to just invoke the spirit of all of those and ask us as folks who are interested in DEI work to honor and abide by those as we move throughout our time together here. So with that being said, we'll jump in. So James mentioned that part of what we want to do before we even get into nitty-gritty details is really talk about the why, right? The why of DEI. And it's so interesting because sociocultural and political events as of late have placed several of our schools in a position where they are really grappling with the why of this work. And so James and I, in our practice, have found Roosevelt Thomas Jr.'s work on building a house for diversity actually to be quite useful in sort of explaining to our constituencies here who might be a little, inquisitive about, what are you doing and why, right? And so I want to start our work off today by sharing my version, if you will, of this tale and offer it to you as a tool to use. People respond to stories, as we know, from neuroscience and tend to remember those. And so this is also going to be included in the resources. So know that you have access to it. You don't have to take notes, you just have to listen. So this is a fable about giraffe and elephant. And as the story goes, and as you can probably see from the visuals here on the screen, these are the 2 main characters in this story, right? So I use this as an analogy to really provide folks with another way of sort of framing why this work is so necessary. So the story goes like this. For years and years and years, right? Giraffe and his partner had really looked forward to the day when they could build their own custom house, right? And you can see there from the visuals that dream has finally become a reality. They now, instead of being in, their former abodes, which sort of cramped their style, that they have been able to build this amazing, beautiful home actually to fit their specs, their specifications, if you will. And they are happy because their dream has finally come true. And so Giraffe, who is also a very avid woodworker, actually in the basement of his house, you can't see it there, but in the basement of his house, he has the whole basement outfitted as a woodworking shop because that's his passion and that's what he does. And so one day when he is working, because of his height, he's able to, see out and see down the street. And he notices a figure moving towards him. And as the figure comes closer, Giraffe is thinking, wait a minute, I know that. I know that shape. I know that person. That is my good buddy Elephant. And oh my gosh, I met him when we were doing woodworking 101, and he is naturally gifted in woodworking. And it would be so great if I invite him. I'm thinking, yeah, I'm going to invite him to come and stay here because we have more than enough room. And together we can actually form a woodworking business, and I can retire from my humdrum business and do my passion. I know Elephant is going to be excited about it because he's just as passionate for woodworking as I am. And so as Elephant comes closer, Giraffe comes out and he's beckoning to him, and they see each other, and it's like this, color purplish kind of moment where they're running across down the street to meet and to greet each other, because they are, such great friends who also are just so fortunate to share such a great passion for woodworking. So Giraffe naturally is like, Elephant, oh my gosh, would you be willing to come? You don't have to pay for anything. You don't have to do anything. I want you to come and stay with us, and we can start a woodworking business so we can do what we love every day. And Elephant is thinking, is this real? I mean, I have hit the lotto. This is amazing. This is exactly what I want to do. So off they go back up the road, and they go to the front door of the house. And what do you think happens? Anyone? That's not rhetorical. Like, somebody unmute and say, what do you think happened? Oh, y'all gonna treat me like my 7th year on Friday?
He can't get in the door.
Oh, thank you. That sounded like LaRonda. Was that LaRonda?
Yeah, it was me.
Thank you, LaRonda. It's almost as if I had paid you. He can't get in the door. And so there's this moment of, let's say, discomfort, but then Giraffe, who's quickly thinking on his feet because he really wants Elephant, is like, wait, hold up. I have a plan. We have a solution. My garage, I built a 4-car size garage in the back. We can go around to the back. We can come through that garage. In fact, it's even better because that will give you direct access into the woodworking space. And so Elephant is like, well, I mean, okay, sure, right? So off they go around to the back of the house, and sure enough, there's a 4-car garage back there, door, and Elephant very easily comes in. And so, Giraffe is showing him like, oh my gosh, look, I have the top quality materials here for you. I have, experts that are here, that are available. We can call in any time, and they are going to help us. And this is going to be so amazing. And he's showing him around the wood shop, right? And Elephant is excited. He's getting more and more excited because this is an opportunity he would never get in his old neighborhood, right? And he gets to live here for free. I mean, really? And so as Elephant starts to relax again and get a little comfortable, they're looking at different things, and Giraffe's wife, his partner, calls down and, because the phone rings, and she's like, honey, it's your boss on the phone. And so Giraffe says, okay, you know what? I'm gonna go take this because I'm about to tell him I quit. You're here, and we're gonna have this great woodworking business. So I'll be right back. You make yourself at home. I mean it. Mi casa es su casa, right? And so Giraffe takes off and goes up the stairs, and Elephant is like, okay, this is my house. Love it. And he starts to move around a little bit more freely. But as he does, his tail accidentally, when he's turning, it accidentally catches just the leg of a table. And one of the pieces that Giraffe was working on sort of tumbles over, crashes to the floor, and sort of splinters. And Elephant is like, oh my goodness, oh, what have I done? Oh, but I can put that back together because I'm gifted and talented enough to be able to put that back together. So it's not that bad, right? And so then he starts to, loosen up again and start to move and get a little free, and it happens again. But he's still thinking, I'm smart, I got in here, I'm talented, I can do this. But he starts to get a little nervous, and so he decides, maybe I better just go upstairs and just be where Giraffe is, right? Just to be safe. And so when he goes and he puts his foot on that very first step, what do you think happens? Not rhetorical, need an answer. Don't make me call on you. Tia, Nadine. I saw
It collapses.
It absolutely collapses. And it just sort of cracks, right? And then Elephant is filled with such shame, and he is mortified, right? And Giraffe and his wife hear it, and they are like, what is happening? What's going on? Are you okay? Are you okay? Right? And I'll pause there because that's enough of that. I think everybody can see where and why James and I love to tell this story. Let me do it this way. How about we pause and ask you to go to the chat feature for just maybe 2 or 3 minutes to sort of write what you're thinking. And if you want to draw the connection between this story and the story of maybe your school or schools that you know, feel free to do that. So we'll pause for 2 minutes, and Felicia, if you'll monitor the chat, we'll just start sharing out themes. So the question is, what are you thinking? And in what ways does this sort of ring true in your daily experience at your own school communities? Yeah, let's go ahead and start sharing some.
So, wow, I have to start with the last one, right? So who were these schools initially built for, and how is that legacy continuing? Folks are feeling, are really relating to the elephant, right? Feeling like they've broken a couple of stairs, feeling bad about those broken steps, but in that story, was that really the elephant's fault? Context matters, right? Others and those that we make. So those are some of the initial.
Perfect. So James, I'll hand it off to you if no one else, or if you want to continue, right?
I'll continue down this path because I think it's an important one, in particular in terms of thinking about. So we use this story because in storytelling, it's easier sometimes to get people to see themselves in the story than to call them out in the story. In our schools in particular, the vast majority of our schools, independent schools in this country, were not designed for people of color. They just were not. I call that out all the time. And even as I sit in a school that was one of the few schools who was desegregated at the time when we were founded, and Martin Luther King Jr. Students, his children went to school here as well during a time when no other independent schools would take him. But yet, even and still, you have to call these things out, because the reality is that the school, while it was founded on social justice principles, wasn't necessarily intentional always about who we had here and how we were nurturing the folks that we had. And many of our independent schools in this country were absolutely not designed for students who did not look a certain way, did not come from a certain background, income, and so forth. And we have to own that and call that out, because without that, we are walking on borrowed principles in terms of believing that we are something that we are not, and that's something that we have to be mindful of. So when we think about this story and we start to dig at home, it is very easy to move through this idea of who the elephant might be in our schools, in terms of faculty, in terms of students, in terms of families. And I always joke and say some of the most well-meaning people have done some of the most egregious things, right? And that's just a reality check for me. And that there are lots of times when people think that, what they are saying or what they're doing are in fact helping, but they haven't necessarily taken the time to actually ask the question of what do I need in terms of being helped, right? So when we think about this analogy and we think about this work, we think about building a plan. And so, I was very intentional when I came to this school in terms of what I wanted to do. I've been a diversity practitioner for a number of years. I'm on the faculty of the Diversity Leadership Institute with NAIS, with Karen as well. And so I knew that I needed to find a place that was also interested in doing this work. And so, as the head of the school, my relationship with the Board of Trustees is paramount to my ability to do the work. I have a board that is supportive. I have a board that is engaged, and I have a board that allows me to do the kind of necessary work internally to move our school. And let's be clear, we have work to do. Like, there is no such thing as a perfect school or perfect place. There is work that needs to be done. And that is even with a board of trustees, a head of school, a director of student life, my chief diversity, inclusion officer, all on the same page in many ways. We still have work to do. So there is no, there's no magic, that's going to turn a school from one thing to another. And so when we think about this idea of building a plan, we think about it in much the way you think about building a house, right? So, we think about not so much, we ask ourselves, how big a house can we build? What can we actually build given the resources, given the inclination, given the people? Do we have the right people to help us build this thing? Have we hired the right folks? Are they on the ground? Or do we have to use the resources that we currently have available to us? And depending on where you are as a school, it could be any of those things or none of those things, quite honestly. Surveying the landscape is really, really important. I've watched schools jump into the fray thinking that they were further along than they were, and I've watched them crash and burn mightily. I have a saying about diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and it has become even more true in this past, 16 months or so. And that is that this work cannot just be a priority for your schools. It cannot be. And what I mean by that is that priorities change over time, right? They change, they come and they go. This work has to be a part of the fabric of your institution, so that no matter what the priority is, the overlay is always diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice work. And that is really difficult sometimes for heads of school to wrap their head around. It is really difficult for boards of trustees to walk their head around. But in the wake of George Floyd and all of the domestic pieces that were going on with Black Lives Matter and so forth, there were so many schools who were rushed to make this a priority all of a sudden. When the fact is that for most people of color, it was always a part of the fabric of our lives. It didn't need to be a priority because it was already there. And so helping schools understand that messaging was really important. But I will tell you that not all schools are ready to hear that message. Not all schools are in a position where they can own the fact that it's a priority of the moment for them, and that in 3 or 4 years they hope that it's no longer a priority, versus it being a part of the fabric. So what we hope to do is walk you through, when you're thinking about how you build the foundation and so forth, is again not so much that we're telling you to build it in the likeness of what we're trying to do, but really surveying the land to see and understand what you can build and how you can build it, and knowing that to build anything, it's one brick at a time. It doesn't always mean that we're going to build the entire building all at once, but we have come to believe that we've got to start building, and that this building has to be across schools and states in this country, as opposed to one school that is doing good work and another one that's doing no work. A rising tide raises all boats, and we feel really strongly about that piece of it. So again, every school is going to have a different blueprint, but we all have to start, and this is our way of helping you start. So.
I wasn't expecting you to finish so soon. So some other elements too that we believe you should keep in mind, obviously, is not just the building aspect of it, but also the maintenance aspect of it, right? And so I think most of us, know that's not something that I could do. Let's say teaching 7th grade, being 7th grade team leader, having my 7th grade advisory, and sponsoring a couple of clubs, here and there when the kids come and they ask, and you just feel like you just have to, right? It was impossible to be full-time manager, right, and leader of, how is our house doing? Are we maintaining what we've built? Are we taking care of the infrastructure that we worked so hard to put in place? It was impossible. I mean, I remember having that conversation with my very first head of school and saying, you can pay me to be a diversity coordinator, but the reality is I can't do all of these jobs at 100%. And you need to know I'm 110%, 150%er. And so it's stressing me, but I see the need and I want to help, but just know something's got to give, right? And so again, as we move into our deeper conversation around the partnership and the need for this, we hope to highlight and help communities understand and hopefully give you some talking points or some strategies or rationale that if you're in that situation that you can use to help others to understand that this is full-time work. It is 24/7 full-time work, right? Just like your chief financial officer and your counselors and all those other people, so is DEI. If, as James said, it's going to be the fabric that overlays and covers the entire community. So we'll sort of pause here.
Yeah, well, I think that to add on to that piece from Karen, and that is that I believe that you can lead from any place. I've been in a number of different places within a school. I just remember talking to a music teacher once, and she was saying that she wanted to do this work, and she just didn't feel like she had a platform. And I said to her, I said, but don't you have performances? And she said, yeah. I said, then you have a platform. What songs are they singing? What's the history behind the work? I said, you can lead from the space you're in without having to have the title and so forth. I said, it becomes harder sometimes, and it doesn't become necessarily as systemic in terms of across the entire school. I said, but that doesn't stop you from being and playing a role within that space. Our schools, when we first started adding diversity practitioners, coordinators, directors, and so forth, one of the things that was happening all along is that it was window dressing. Schools were adding these positions because they felt like they had to. They felt like the school down the street was doing it, so they had to do it. But they weren't intentional about how they were bringing people in. They weren't intentional about little things like did the person even have a budget? Who did the person report to? What authority did they have within the school to be able to go about doing their work? And so there's a reason why the average tenure for a diversity practitioner over the last few years has been under 5 years. They don't come in and stay because they don't find themselves in places that are conducive to the work being done, and to the fact that I would argue that most diversity practitioners out there, whether they're coordinator or or whatever, are like Karen in the sense that they want to give 150% of their time and their energy to this work because they care deeply about it. And to run into roadblock after roadblock, it beats you down. It really does. And so looking at structures within a school, looking at how these pieces, and then understanding that if the structure in your school is such that you don't have the larger 50,000 foot structural pieces to be able to do the work, then understanding and asking yourself a big question around this idea of what is it that I can do, and am I okay with that? Because those are things that will have to come into play. So what I would love for you to do is just to take a quick brain break and not too much think about what we've been talking about, but more, where is your school? Where do you see yourself in your school in your particular journey in this? Are you in a space where you feel like you have the support and the mechanisms to start to build and to plan and to create this house? Are you at a school that has resources that are being put into this, and you can help shape and shift those resources? Because I think that in order to get us moving, we have to assess where we are. And so just, this, you can use the chat if you like, but this is more an exercise that I want you to do, whether here or later, because in order for you to really kind of take a good, hard, deep look at how to get from A to B, you have to look at your school and ask yourself some important questions. Is the head on board? Or if you're on this call and you are the head, is your board of trustees on board? And what does that look like, and what does that mean? How do you support each other in this work? Do you feel like you have the space to do the work, or are you just there because they feel like they need to have somebody there, but you don't feel like you have the impact that you want? But ask yourself some really meaningful questions right now. in terms of where your specific school is, but also where are you in this journey in terms of this work. All right, as you finish your thoughts, we're gonna shift gears just ever so slightly because Karen and I are gonna talk a little bit about our relationship, which I think you might find interesting, in that we were colleagues before Karen came here to Galloway School. So she's in her first year here. I was able to wrestle her away from the Green Hill School out in Dallas. And you would think that because Karen and I are both practitioners, that we are always on the same page in terms of how we approach this work. And so we want to talk about what, as Felicia laughs at us, and so we want to talk a little bit about the relationship piece, because it's an important piece of this puzzle, and we want to make sure that you can also see kind of the flawed systems that we bring to the table every day, even though we care deeply about this work, and what that means for our schools, what that means for our relationship, and then how we really look to overcome those things so that we can be on the same page as we work through this. So yeah.
It's like, I'm thinking, in other words, if James would just do exactly what I say, we wouldn't have to go through this, right? So one of the things that we have worked on.
And you should add that sometimes I have to protect you from yourself, right? That just long as that those two things go hand in hand. I'm just, okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm just here enjoying the whole ride.
So one of the things before we get into this that is both characteristic of all three of us actually is really being intentional and detail oriented about processes, right? And really trying to practice mindfulness about not getting so caught up in the 5 alarm fires, if you will, or the daily grind, that we are not still, respecting our professional roles and our professional responsibilities. And so one of the things that I love about Galloway that was a draw was that it was not only, coming to work here, but, being a practitioner of your practice, right? And so James and I worked together like early fall, or probably since I've known him, on, not just assuming things like the partnership, even though we've known each other. And, I tried to move in his house, but he wouldn't let me stay when I first moved down here, but that's okay. I had a key, he took it back, but I feel like he's going to give me one soon. Either that or I'm going to kidnap his children. But in spite of that, like James was saying, in spite of our personal relationship outside of Galloway, we still are committed to, that sense of professionalism to make sure that we are not only, being practitioners of our craft, but that we're also modeling that for the rest of our faculty and staff here. Right. And so one of the things that I love about James as a head of school is he doesn't ask you what he doesn't do himself. So, every day he's out there at carpool, morning, rain, and every afternoon, if it's not covered, he's going to be the first person that's out there, something that I really respect. And so to that end, he and I have really been focused on, things that I've never focused on with former heads of school, like, well, what makes an effective partnership, right? And we need to be intentional about building this and then putting strategies in place to maintain this, and then using ourselves as models for the rest of our school community. And so we wanted to present 6 hallmarks that we felt really were absolutely critical. It's not the end all be all, but it's just something that we sort of did our own research and then decided to come together to author to be able to share out with other folks. And we're just gonna sort of talk through these and tell you what they mean to us and why they spoke to us. And please know, again, I will, not only will you get the diagram itself, but I have a cheat sheet full of notes with all of this stuff on there. So all you had to do is just listen. So James, you want to kick us off?
Well, the first one is, one community, one team, one mission. And it was really, this is a really, really important one, whether you're talking about diversity work or you're talking about any other kind of work that's happening at the school. Being on the same page, the way we work here at the school is that it is not uncommon for us to lean into conflict. Some folks do it better than others. And sometimes it's a little less stressful or less messy than at other times, but we lean into conflict because we don't see conflict as something that is a negative thing. We see it as something that's a positive piece and a growth piece. And so to end up to being able to get to this place where your community, your team, and all is in alignment with the mission and so forth, means that you do have to go through some conflict. And that's okay, because if you call it out and you can continue to live in that space, then you have a better opportunity of actually coming out on the other side stronger, better, and more prepared to continue to move forward, whatever the work is. And we've really leaned into this concept as it pertains to diversity, equity, and inclusion, because we do know and recognize that not everybody on the team is coming from the same place, with the same energy, with the same ideas, and so forth. And so really spending and taking the time to build the community component and the team component so that you are in alignment is important. And sometimes people overlook the importance of this and they go right into the work or in the workshops and the trainings and so forth. You can do all the training in the world that you want. You can bring in all the speakers that you want. But if you haven't primed your community to be at least moving in this direction, and the teams that are going to be in place to do this work are on the same page, then what you're doing is you're just you're catching haphazardly people with different bits and pieces of information instead of having a full strategic look at the work. And so this idea of one community, one team, and one mission is really important. And again, something that can be applied both to our relationship, but also to our school and the work that we do, no matter what work that is.
So I'm gonna jump in and ask James a question.
Sure.
Because if you've ever moved jobs, or if you're like me, you've been in Texas all your life, and then all of a sudden you decide at this age to up and move, you do a lot of careful research of the place and the people that you are getting ready to walk into. And one of the things that I know about James and appreciated is going to be the reason that I'm going to ask him to talk a little bit about this. So the question, James, is, and what do you do as a head of school, right, when you can't get people on one team, one mission, one community? What happens when values and beliefs prevent this symbiotic and great alignment? And how long?
Karen's asking me a loaded question because she knows the answer to this question. And the reality is that, listen, I spend the majority of my time strategizing about the team, not so much just about the work. I recognize that as the head of the school, I'm not in those classrooms. I'm not in most of the meetings. My job is facilitating, making sure that everybody has everything that they need. But I recognize that, it only takes one person to completely derail, the work that you're trying to do. I've made a career in terms of, when I've been in positions of helping teams become their best selves. And so I do a lot of work with finding and helping people find their best space. And Felicia can attest to this, and she has beat me down for the past 3 years because we've been working on Felicia in terms of, she is an amazing director of student life, but she has a talent that's bigger than that. And so making sure that we find the right space for her is something that's really important to me. And then making sure that people,
right?
whatever. And then making sure also that when you do recognize that there are people that are not on the same page or not willing to make the changes that are necessary to move an institution forward, not being afraid to let them find another place, quite honestly. And so, it is important for me that people do know that this is about, about the us, the capital U, the capital S, and not the me. Right. And so, I'm not afraid to help people see that, you know what, this may not be the best place for you. Or if it is the best place for you, then we may need to think about what it is you're doing or the role that you have and so forth. Because I really do want everybody to be able to be their best selves. And sometimes being your best self doesn't necessarily equate with being in the space that you're in. Your best self may be at another place. I know for a fact that for me personally, you know, my work here as a head of school feels way different and better than my work as a head of school at another school. So, you know, I am not afraid to mix things up, because I think that in the long run, if my job is to make sure that this institution outlives me and that this institution is better than I found it, then that's a responsibility that I have to make sure that that happens. And I also have the responsibility in terms of the folks that are around me to check me when either I'm moving too fast, not fast enough, or, you know, not thinking about things in all the right ways. So it is a symbiotic relationship, you know, and I do listen, even though sometimes they say that I don't listen enough. I am always listening and I'm always watching, because at the end of the day, the legacy that we leave is the school. It's not ourselves.
So
Just
what's the trick?
no, I thought I saw a hand raised.
That's LaRonda. I think she might have been saying amen.
Oh, okay. Just okay, carry on.
I don't know. Were you saying amen? But I want to ask too, because we talk about all constituencies, and so I'm wondering if you're willing to share with the audience tips or strategies that you use when this conversation is centered around families. And I'm thinking specifically of this new wave of woke that seems to be percolating up. I don't know, raise your hand on the chat if y'all are familiar with that. James had to tell me, because I hadn't heard of it until recently, but in the wake of political events and things, it seems to be gaining some traction in some places. And so, I mean, these are the people who also make our raises and salaries possible. So,
but at the same time, I think this is the idea of community team and mission, right? You know, living out your mission is one of the most important things that we do in independent schools. So hopefully you have a mission that is worth living out, quite honestly. And the reality of that means that there are sometimes people who, you know, I've been in schools where people come to you because you're the default school versus they're coming to you because they actually believe in what you do. Like, let's just be clear. And so, you know, the reality for me is that, you know, if you have people who don't believe in the mission of the school, who are there and who are not, you know, finding themselves, you know, and I'm not saying that everybody has to be on the same page in terms of believing and doing all the same things, but if they are actively engaging and not helping the school be its best self, then in the long run, it's not worth having those families in your community. And I say this from a position of privilege. I won't lie. The Atlanta market is an incredible market in terms of schools being full. And I know that every market and every head of school cannot say that. But for me in this space, I do have, you know, the privilege of being able to help families find a better fit school for them. And in particular, as it pertains to this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I am not willing to compromise the work for a family or for even a set of families, when in fact, by compromising the work, I'm probably losing families, quite honestly. And so it's a hard row. And so, you know, as a head, I've been in the other position of having to actually take just a family that came. And so, you know, for me, I see both sides.
awesome. Oh, thank you. LaRonda wants to know, are you training heads of school? Do they have a place to go to and gain this knowledge?
So here's the reality of heads of schools. Let's just be clear. Some of them think they know more than they do. Some of them, you know, and listen, I talk to them all the time. And so this is not something I wouldn't say in a group of heads because I know them. I'm one of them in many ways. And so, you know, what I've committed to doing is working with heads of schools, and in particular, new heads of schools that are trying to come into spaces and make change and still have that wherewithal in terms of really wanting to, you know, to make their schools better places and offering up some of these lessons. Because listen, you know, part of the reason I can speak as freely as I do is because I've been knocked down a lot of times. You know, when you have a board and you have, you know, someone who looked at me once and said, you know, they don't believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion. They think it's a fad. And that's one of your bosses in terms of being on a board. Like, I get it. So, you know, so the game is real in terms of trying to be ahead of school in this, but you also have to look at yourself and say, what are you willing to, you know, what are you willing to deal with for the better good and compromise on versus what you're not? And there are certain things that I just won't compromise on. And I'm okay with that. But, you know, heads of schools are interesting people, and I include myself in that interesting category because you're essentially trying to manage people. And guess what? You know, you shouldn't manage people, you should lead them. And it becomes a really kind of interesting space depending on the school, the board, the faculty, and so forth. But yeah, I have been working on training heads of school and working on giving them some practical advice about how to think about this work. And you know, I think time will tell in terms of where those lessons land.
Okay, I'm gonna let James get out of the hot seat and move on to some of these other hallmarks, even though I myself have questions, right? But and that sort of lends itself to the next point, and I'll cover maybe a couple of them, and then we can maybe stop and talk some more. But one of the things that James knew that I was struggling with was this idea of influential power, being in a position that had tons of influential power, absolutely no positional power, right? And the nuance of watching somebody like my director of academics, director of curriculum have positional power, right? Yet I just could walk around and have meetings and basically beg and plead people, please, will you do an audit of our curriculum? We need to, you know, can we look at the teaching tolerance anti-bias framework, you know? And so part of the heaviness, I think, that feeds that statistic about the lifespan of diversity practitioners being 5 and under is that that's a lot of work. You know how many conversations I've had with people and how much energy and effort I put into presentations, and, you know, you do your homework when you go in, only to be told after all that work, I don't know if it's the right time. Right. And so when people ask, like, why would you leave your state? Why would you leave your home? One of them is for exactly what we're sharing here as a hallmark, knowing that I was going to be able to be in a partnership with someone who was granting me trust and respect, and most importantly, that authority, right? That positional power to be able to do what it is that I'm called to do. That, out of all of the stuff, is number one for me, because it is so hard. And I see Angela nodding heads. I can't see the rest of you, but you can do a thumbs up or whatever. But I think for DEI practitioners, that's a lot of running around to be told no to. The amount of work and sacrifice that we put in, you know, only and I should say, and then I'll get off my soapbox, and then to have to turn around and look at your students and their families in the face, because, you know, nothing is really changing, right? Nothing is really changing on the inside. And so James and I are very clear, and have been always very clear about, you know, talking to people who are starting this work to say, look, the elephants are here because you wanted them here. Didn't nobody tell you to go get them. You wanted them. And don't even get me started on why. You wanted to win a football game. I am from Texas, so I can say that. And so you went and got them, right? And they did whatever requirements to get in, and now they're here. And what we're saying is, heads and CDEIOs don't have the luxury of time to be trying to trust each other and gain trust and build trust and respect. And I don't have the luxury of time to be trying to influence each other. And so people who know me know I've been quoting Martin Luther King. Like, I walked around my former job saying, you know, I'm like MLK in the latter days. Time out for all the rest of that. Or if you were at POCC with Bettina Loves, like, I don't need any more allies. I got enough. What I want is action. I want somebody who is going to be a co-conspirator and let me do what I have been called and trained to do. And so that's a real important hallmark for us. And as you can probably tell, I'll go ahead and highlight the next one, which I'll feature real talk. Because if you go in and you sit down and you spell this out, you are then able to extend that into your discussion platform so that you can be real with each other, right? The mask that we wear, there's a heaviness in that, right? Day after day. I am grateful that I have a head of school and we have a partnership where I can go in and close the door and take it off. Like literally take off my mask and take off that, that figurative mask and be able to talk real, and I'm not talking, not just about whatever the latest DEI news is, but to be able to talk real with each other about us and our working relationship together. And so, I don't know how my boss feels about it. But I know he listens, because if he doesn't, then I text him until he tells me stop texting him. And occasionally I will send him I messed around at one time and sent like 100 email requests. I don't know what that was all about, but that doesn't happen unless you go into the position and both parties agree that the needs of our children are first and foremost. So because we are on the same team, we got one mission, I picked you because you have the qualifications and all that stuff. We are just going to trust each other. I respect you. I respect what you do. And I am giving you the authority to do your job. And so that then lends itself to us being able to sit down and for me to say, okay, well then James, as he mentioned earlier, protects me from myself, for as much as I really don't want to hear it, when he's like, well, he has this crazy analogy about doll houses and painting red chairs, but he knows me. I want to do everything and I want to do it all at once. And so, I don't have to have my mom in Atlanta because James is like walking out the door at 4:15, 4:30, and he's like, you need to be out of here. You have to leave. And literally, like, he has actually told me, you need to get out of your house. I want you to go to the park and take a picture. And I was like, oh, you just want me to take a picture? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. He goes, no, get a newspaper, go stand outside and take a picture. And I was like, really? But this is the first time I've been in an environment where the mutual respect that we have for each other and the challenges that we face in our roles, where that is mutual, right? And anytime that we feel like it's being threatened or, it's not that it's perfect, but we can sit down and, I got a love note in here, Felicia, from James, because he said something one night that sent me over the edge. Yep, I sure do. He came in, the next day he's standing at my door like, get up, come here. I'm gonna give you a hug. And I was like, I don't want a hug. He's like, come here anyway, right? And so again, it's not that it's perfect, but when the parties are willing to sacrifice self on behalf of the children, you do what you need to do, right? And I'm gonna name, James is Black, in case y'all couldn't see that, and so am I. I have had glimpses of this with non-Black heads of school. And I know some that I haven't worked with, but I know some that very much that leadership style, right? That empathic leadership, daring leadership style, that they embody that and have those types of relationships. So it's not just about race.
Yeah. But Nadine, you said something in there which I think is really important, and that is the challenge of finding these spaces within the school and finding these relationships within the school depending on role. I do a leadership piece with Nicole Dufresard for AIS as well for POCC, and we talk about this thing that is really true, and that is, understanding when you've given your all and you've done what you can and when to walk away. And I don't say that lightly. I say that as someone who has left, schools on good terms and who has left schools on bad terms in my, 20 plus year career. But I say this and I know that it's complicated, COVID and families and you name it, it gets complicated. But your self-worth and self-identity is one of those things that that I think about that is one that is hard to compromise on, and you have to ask yourself where does that fall for you in terms of looking at the place that you're in. I am a firm believer, and this is I believe this, and that is that our schools, and I'm using the collective R, they need us more than we need them, even though they front like that we need them. And I'll just be real about that. The fact is that, every school in the country out there is looking for highly qualified, good people of color. And I believe that. And so, you have more power and probably more agency as a person of color trying to do this work than maybe you give yourself or even know that you should have credit for. And that's real. And here's the thing, most of us as heads of schools, we recognize that and we know it, even though we don't always say it out loud to folks, because it's scary to say out loud, because you have to, in order to say it out loud, you have to acknowledge the fact that you don't have as much control as you'd like to believe that you do have, even as the head of the school. And so, that's a real piece for me in terms of helping professionals understand that, there are some amazing schools and places out there that will treat you the way you deserve and need and want to be treated. But sometimes you have to figure out, like, what does that look like and what are you willing to sacrifice and or give up in terms of moving and change to be able to get that. And that's a really personal part of the question for folks. And I would tell people to really examine that piece of the work that they're doing at their schools with their peers, because it's real. And that's a real piece of this. The other piece that I think is really important is the checks and balances pieces. It is, we won't talk through all 6 of these, but the checks and balances is really an important thing, because without it, you could be as a head of school, without checks and balances, you can find yourself being the emperor with no clothes on. You could find yourself out there in a situation where you think you know or have more information than you actually do, because whatever reason, people are either scared of you or they don't want to tell you. You have to try to create relationships where people will tell you the truth. The truth isn't always something that you necessarily want to hear or is easy to hear, but the truth is one of those things that, in terms of thinking about checks and balances, that is real. Just this weekend, Karen was on me because I'd had an interaction with a colleague that I was hot about. And I ain't gonna lie, like I was angry, and I was hot. And Karen, she knew it. And she knew that somebody had to move me beyond my anger to get me back focused in on what was right for the school. And she was able to do that, and it ended up just fine. To her, took her credit. But that's where having people around you that are not afraid to challenge you and not afraid to call you out when they know where your intentions and your emotions are, so that you cannot lose track of the work, is really important. And so I do thank not only Karen and Felicia, but the team here, because they helped me with that. Because I need that as a head of school. I absolutely need that, and I give them the respect, the trust, and the authority to be able to do that. And I haven't always had that when I wasn't a head of school, and so it was one of those things that when I became a head of school, I wanted to make sure that was a part of who I was as a leader, is to have people around me that were brighter, smarter than me, that knew more than me, and who at times could tell me what to do. And it's been important.
Yeah, I was going to offer just my check and balance often comes in the written form. Get mad and write something, and I'll go, did that feel good? No, you can't send that. Let's write draft 2, 3, 4, 10.
Right. Yeah. And there have been times when she said, you can't send it, and I didn't.
Yeah.
And that, yeah. So you're kind of the last one that we really haven't focused on, but I'll just mention here in closing with this is this concept of reciprocity. And we are really embodying the African principle of, does anybody know as a guest? Anybody want to unmute and say the concept of I am, because I knew Jacob was on the call. Unmute yourself and share.
Ubuntu.
Yes. How did I know? I knew you were, I saw you. So thank you. Do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Uh,
I mentor Jacob, so he has to, you know.
it's the concept of I am because you are, and we are because individually we are committed to this together. And
Yeah.
so it's, I get as much of this out of this as we do. And so I'm fully bought in, I'm fully bringing myself to this work. And we're building off of the fact that each of us is individually making that collective commitment.
Well, and thank you. Yes, perfect, always. And the other piece to that for us is James will never be at his best unless I'm at my best, right? So that is really key for us when James is talking to the board, when he's talking to, you know, unhappy parents even, right? Or when I'm talking to the board, or, you know, and explaining people, it's like, you got to bring your A game too, right? Because we're all in this together, and we are always focused on holding our kids at the center, not just the giraffe, but the elephants and all the rest of them, right? So with that, we have been intentional about, you know, not just talking, but actually putting, you know, some resources into financial, human resources, time resources, into actual instruments and strategies, tools. And we wanted to really save a chunk of this time together to have Felicia talk about the great work that she does using the HBDI instrument. So Felicia?
Well, thank you, Karen. She said that very pointedly, because the two of these fine folks that I work with love to call this tool HDMI, and I have to get on the So my part today is, so I called myself Chief Adolescent Strategist. My other secret title is Chief Adult Strategist. And so that role is really using a tool that was introduced to Galloway, or we started using at Galloway a couple of years ago, that has really been an interesting, no one wants to talk to me until I start presenting. Right now, all of a sudden my phone is buzzing. There's really been a really great tool to help facilitate some of these conversations that have been really useful, not only the work that James and Karen are doing in the realm of DEI work, but also just as a community at large. So HBDI is a tool that assesses your thinking preferences. And different from Myers-Briggs, different from DISC, it is looking at thinking preferences because the way we think really impacts how we process information, and in turn, how we communicate it, how we might behave, how we might output a presentation or a project, interpret that information. And so it's really tapping into how folks are really engaging and communicating, versus sort of assessing a personality point, which is sort of really just personal information. And so this tool has really been a great way to create some common language and dialogue in the community. And so what the instrument points out are we all have four preferences, or four ways of thinking that are accessible to us, and some of them we prefer more than others, hence the preferences in the profile. And there are four ways of thinking. There's what is considered the rational self, the blue way of thinking, and that's a more analytical, logical, rational, like I want to know what, tell me the proof, tell me the data way of thinking. It's a way of thinking that wants to know how things work, wants to know sort of the quantifiable measure of anything that's sort of presented. There's the sort of the green way of thinking, which is a safekeeping from risk, really, way of thinking. And this is the thinking that asks, you know, how is this going to get done? It prefers organization, planning, you know, establishing procedures, you know, those kinds of things. And really asks again, how. There's a red preference, a red way of thinking. And that is really sort of this intuitive, collaborative feeling self, interpersonal, likes to teach, likes to talk, wants to know who's involved, who's at the table, really sensitive to others. And then there's a yellow preference, a really more visionary, experimental way of thinking that really takes risks, sees a bigger picture, is very curious, holistic, and can paint a broader picture than maybe what's in the moment. So each of us has the ability to access all four of these preferences, all four of these ways of thinking, But it is likely at any given time, we are leaning on 1, 2, maybe even 3 preferences without any intervention, when any information is presented to us. And so what that is doing is creating this sort of cognitive space where folks are processing, if before these things are uncovered, folks are processing and reacting and interpreting in ways that can be pretty staid if and when we don't uncover it, and really can lead to some interesting tension if it is not named. So I think we can go to the next slide. So we spend hours unpacking this tool and the results for folks, but would love for you to take a second and see if any of these particular colors resonate with you personally. If there's something that sounds like, that seems, I feel like a green speaks to me, or blue or yellow or multiple colors. But would also love, take a second to think about that. Think about where you see yourself in these colors. And of course, there's an assessment that would back up or maybe refute where you see yourself.
I'm also interested to know if people can do like a show of hands of schools that also use this tool. It's been fascinating for me as a newbie here at Galloway.
Yeah, it's a tool that's really used in corporate America
Go back.
more than school. The school realm is a new frontier.
Purple.
That's because she's in Texas.
So
Felicia, can you, as they're thinking about that, can you just really quickly tell them, why we decided to bring the tool all the way into the school?
Sure. So the tool originally showed up with a previous head because of a parent whose consulting work. So a lot of CEOs and leaders in corporate America are given this tool as a way to help with leadership, right? It's a pretty popular, Fortune 500. And so that particular parent offered it to the head of school, who then offered it to her leadership team at the time. And it really sort of stayed within that body of 12 folks. And then we then used it, the same parent offered to donate it to a summer leadership program we did for folks of color, for them to sort of chart their leadership journey. James came along and saw some value in maybe expanding how it was used. And so we first brought it into the doors to do work with our art department first, who they were having quite a complicated time getting on the same page about a lot of things, right? A lot of emotionally charged conversation. They were talking all the time, but were not effectively communicating. So that was sort of how the HBDI broke the barrier of Galloway outside of the leadership team. And then once we saw how effective it was with the art department, we actually gave the entire faculty and staff the instrument. And then I did work with each level. I did work with teacher pairs, committees. The cult is real at the Galloway School, but that's how it kind of came through the doors. Because there's value in layers in this work, both personally and process-wise. And we'll talk a little bit about how we've used it particularly to help with the work that they are doing. Just real quick, I know a lot of folks on this call are really doing the DEI work, but we were gonna ask you to take a second to think about folks, if you are not those folks who are doing the DEI work in your school, what preferences they might exhibit. But more importantly, if there were moments of tension around any issues with DEI, can you see how perhaps opposing preferences, or not opposing, but different preferences sitting at the table may have been a part of that tension? And want you to hold on to that thought for a second, and we'll show you a little bit more about what we mean by that. So I see you guys have been self-identifying. We got some yellows, some reds, some blues.
Well, I think the other thing that I like about it too, having done things like intercultural conflict styles that James and I do sometimes for NAIS, is I love the fact that this is about your brain, right? And your preferences. And so it sort of it's an interesting way to present just how diverse we really are, i.e. not all Black people think the same. Think the same way, because this really just focuses on the brain as an organ and how it you know, how it works and how it thinks. So I love the fact that we can broaden the conversation and try to help break folks out of the tendency to assume that all of our stories are the same story.
Yeah.
That's a nice.
You know, and it really is an interesting, so it's a 125 question assessment. People get freaked out when they see it, and we're like, it's that we're not using it to determine whether or not you can do your job, right? This is not about what skill sets you have. It's none of that, right? It is really to give us tools to understand each other better. But let's look at what happens when all of this cognitive diversity is sitting around the table, because what happens is, Karen, we can go to the next slide. What happens is all of us get our results, and the way it works is you basically get a result that gives you two profiles, your sort of day-to-day, if nobody bothers you, this is how you process all things. So for example, we have access to all 4 preferences, but I am off the charts yellow. If you give me a free moment, I will brainstorm till I'm blue in the face. Just love big picture stuff. It's my favorite thing to do. Hate a spreadsheet. Can do it, don't want to do it. And am often sitting at the table with other folks who, again, without intentional stretching or shifting, you know, maybe in a different space. So what happens when you have these different preferences without intentionality, or without even this tool to name that, sitting at a table trying to talk about a singular concept, right? So let's look at that, right? So think about these preferences we've just, and Karen, you can hit all of the little buttons. So if you had to think now before we've identified these preferences, you have blue preferences sitting at a table. We don't typically think about folks in singular spaces like this, but someone from a blue lens is thinking about diversity. Somebody says, what's diversity, right? If you're from a blue preference, what is diversity in that moment initially? What is that? How would a person from a blue perspective or preference might they describe diversity or answer that question?
I have a question too. Like, so I'm curious, you know, are these the board members who immediately hear diversity and think, oh, my dollars, financial aid, blah, blah, blah type people?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't relegate it to a role, right? That person could be a teacher, right?
I mean, yeah, but I mean that, yeah, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that's a very blue sort of lens reaction or space to think about, right? How much does it cost, right? What are demographics? What do we mean by diversity? These are typically the folks that will say, well, what does that mean? And I'm like, well, that's what I just asked you, right? Okay. So there's that piece, right? So next. What about green? How might green preferences define diversity? And you all can enter in the chat or just say out loud if you have any thoughts.
I hear teachers asking what they have to give up in their curriculum. Am I right?
Yeah, right. How will introducing diversity impact my plan? How will we do this? How will we make this happen? You'll have these big ideas, you know, how are we going to carry this out, right? What does it look like? It's a little bit of a green, right? So now my preferences don't live in this side. So already, if the first thing somebody says, when somebody says something about diversity, if the first thing out of somebody's mouth is something about financial aid, or how much does it cost, or demographics, my red preference is mad already. I'm already heated, right?
Yeah. So glad you said.
So let's click to red, right? So if we're thinking about from a red preference, if again, all of these folks are sitting at the table and somebody says, what is diversity, right? What's a red preference likely gonna lead with?
Karen, move.
Yeah. Oops.
Yep.
Oops, I'm sorry, I did out of order, but you can click both.
Red.
Just put them both. Yep. There you
Okay.
go.
So what's a red preference gonna lead with?
Who's at the table? I can't be the only one. I mean, I'm new, so I love this instrument, but come on, the rest of you. I see great comments in the chat too. Because I've done strengths finders too, Diane. So I'm responding. I had the same reaction.
Well, the red piece is going to be talking about the people. It's going to be the emotional component. It's going to be, you know, how does it impact, you know, and so you immediately go to the personal as opposed to the numbers.
Oh, this is a great one, Pamela. Thank you. So change in the curriculum, number of new activities. That's awesome. So that's a little bit of blue and red combined. Those are great. That's a great response, right? And red is literally looking at, it could look at a lot of things, right? Like, who are we talking about? Are we ready? You know, those kinds of things.
Oh, sorry. I thought I heard, did I hear Jacob? I heard a voice. I just wanted to. Did somebody unmute? Nope. Oh, okay. Just streaming.
But to that point, Jacob did put a great thing in the chat about Yella thinks about, yes, what's next, right? What's the future? Where can we take this, right? So imagine you don't have HBDI language at the table, right? And all these preferences are sitting at the table trying to come to some, I have been in this diversity committee meeting 800 times in my life, right? Where we're all trying to come to some consensus of what do we mean by diversity? And all of these preferences, now sometimes it's not preferences, sometimes folks are just being jerks, but the jokes aside, all of these preferences are sitting at the table without some sort of language or common language to shift everyone either to similar work or similar goals. Then everybody's really just going to be frustrated and tense and mad and walk away, right? And so what HBDI has allowed for us is this ability to a really thoughtful whole brain answer includes all of these things, right? If you're strategically planning to think about and really look at a plan for diversity, or thinking about how to even engage in having the conversation about diversity, you are thinking about how to engage all of these preferences or answer all of these questions, right? And that's something that this tool has really allowed us to do a little bit more effectively. Okay, so.
And, you know, because I think that one of the things that's really important is that, you know, sometimes when you're in a meeting and you're talking about these kinds of things, to also take a step back and understand your own preferences, right? Because, you know, there have been plenty of times when I'm like, oh my goodness, if they ask me one more time about like what our numbers are, you know, I'm going to go crazy. But then when you take that step back, and it's because I don't live necessarily most days in my blue, right? I'm more in my red as well. And so I'm constantly thinking about the impact. I'm thinking about, you know, what is this going to do for this child's life and so forth. And if I'm not careful, I could really look at someone and believe that they're not invested in the work. And it's not necessarily true that they're not invested. They're just coming at it from a different perspective. And so giving space for all of these things to be able to be in a room without the frustration of thinking that somebody is trying to go against has been really helpful in terms of thinking about this, because, you know, you need those analytical folks in that space just as well as you need, you know, the organizers and the risk takers and the empathetic. Because that's what gets you to a holistic answer. And I think that that's the hard part of this work, is that, you know, that we all have the good intention of trying to do it and help people and so forth. But sometimes we're only coming at it from one of these four quadrants as opposed to trying to come from all four. And some long-term systemic use and understanding of this tool is what gets you this kind of overall sense that this becomes a fabric of the work as opposed to just the priority of the work, because everybody's it feels like they can come into the conversation in a way that they can be valued for what they bring.
And to that point, in an ideal world, I mean, you know, what this has really given us is a data point that's really given us some community norms and really allowed us to remove some assumptions about intent. So again, these really charged conversations, we have some common language that allows us to remove the, well, that's not very Galloway or blah, blah, blah. And one of the best examples that I'll give really quickly is, and this probably didn't happen at your school, it probably only happened at Galloway, but when we made, or when the email went out that talked about coming back to school, and some factions of the community, to put it bluntly, lost their minds. You know, Karen, can you go back to the sort of 4 different cells for a second? Mm-hmm. You know, so it is statistically true that oftentimes teachers or educators tend to have higher preferences in red and yellow. It doesn't mean that that makes you a better teacher or anything. It's just the pool tends to pull higher in red and yellow. There's no value in that. There's no profile is better. The language of crisis, the language in planning, it is often written in blue and green type of language. This is how you do it. This is what it means. And coming back to school for COVID was no different. You got to wear a mask. Here's the statistics we're looking at, right? These very red and yellow folks saw that email and was like, oh my God, Galloway is trying to kill us. They hate us. They don't love us anymore. And so in a meeting after the meeting where everybody was losing their mind, I just politely said, hey, hi, I just want to remind everybody that, from an HBDI lens, is it possible that the language, you are assuming intent based on language that is really written from the perspective of crisis and not from the personal perspective, and maybe they're two different things, which diffused the room a little bit, right? And allowed them to go, oh, okay, all right. So it is, it was
but I would say also that, in what it allowed us to do, or actually allowed me to do, is to create another avenue to get the red and the yellow in. And so, had to get the messaging out in terms of families and kids and so forth that was very blue and green in terms of that, but then offered up a forum to actually be able to have conversations to get folks in terms of the yellow and the red, because I knew that the two had to work together in terms of trying to come up with a space where everybody could feel like they are being heard, and that everybody felt like that one area wasn't, taking over for another area. And I will tell you, it was really difficult. It was difficult enough to put the communication together, and it was doubly difficult to then sit and have.
Hold on, what?
So I think the thing that I saw, especially as a new person coming in, watching this all play out, is that often in crises, which, let's just be real, DEI crises kind of go hand in hand for some of our schools who would rather react and hope that it doesn't happen, but then rush to react, is that the tendency was to target the individual where it was coming from. So so people got mad at James. That's what I'm saying. People started questioning James and what his intentions were. And, I thought I knew, or whatever. And for me, it was just interesting because I could put myself in his shoes as the diversity practitioner who has had people say, that's my program. Or my favorite line was, oh, you just want to do this because you're Black. Anyway,
so do you mind just the next slide? And while we're talking about this, Diane, we have used compass points, not necessarily for leadership here at Galloway, but for just smaller activities for orienting activities, but not necessarily a deep dive for leadership, and only because it really only gives you so much by comparison. I just wanted to give you a real quick sort of blue slide here, show you two different things. Go back just one for me real quick, Karen.
Go back to this one.
Right. Go forward. No, go forward.
Over here?
One visual at a time up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So when you get HBDI results, you basically get these two figures that show your results. So the solid line is kind of where you are without anybody bothering you, how what your preferences are. And the dotted line, this tool also gives you sort of how you respond under pressure, like what life looks like for you under pressure, where your preferences shift, which, 2020, 2021, who's not operating under pressure, right? So that's also a really interesting thing to note. What this image is that you're looking right now is actually James and Karen's profiles collapsed on top of each other. So this is, they are morphed, right? So this is the head of school and the CDEIO, how they function in sort of, I'm assuming you can see my arrow, but I don't know if you can. The day-to-day in the solid line, and then where they collectively go under stress. So they are hitting all of the preferences without any sort of intervention, but they have to be a little bit more intentional about the blue because collectively it's just not where they live. They live in the yellow and the red collectively, and under stress, they just can't be bothered with the blue. So they have to be intentional. And to that point, the second image is so this is two of them individually and this is them under pressure. And again, 2021, 2020. I don't think the other profiles even exist anymore. Karen is the dotted pink line. James is the dotted black line. They have very similar profiles, particularly under pressure. Again, the thing that they often have to be mindful of as they are strategizing, as they are planning for things around DEI work, they are going to have very similar approaches to things. They have to be mindful of either stretching themselves to include that blue quantitative data, fact checking, procedural kinds of piece as they're rolling out whatever strategies or talking about things, or pulling somebody to the table that will help them carry out that role. And I will say that the leadership team we all have these preferences in us, but there are some folks who can default to this blue without a second thought. And so this tool, again, gives us opportunities when folks are getting ready to sit down and plan and plot. It's easy to say, oh, now wait now, y'all need to be mindful that, you're about to go into a room full of very high red preferences and neither of you have red. So somebody needs to learn how to talk to people.
But I think that it's important. I went ahead and put this slide up because it's another one of those things that I watched in James and, his intentionality around knowing people and then building the team, right? Because it is a financial sacrifice for us to do this, but I appreciate the fact that when we're in crisis moments, there is blue that's at the table, right?
So what the tool has done, different from any tool, and again, I've been here since the beginning of time, it feels like, again, it's created this common language to do, again, work around diversity, work around team building, helping teachers think about what does it mean to really assess, helping folks to think about their professional growth. It really has been a unifying community tool that, again, takes some of that emotionally charged divisive rhetoric out of the way and gives folks a common way to sort of look at things that we might be trying to do. So that was my piece to contribute to today's conversation.
So we will just let James sort of wrap us up here. I know we promised time for comments, but oops, my bad. We kind of did that. JCW, you want to end?
Sure, I can end. I'll end by saying that the work is hard. I'm just going to acknowledge that, and that it's hard whether you're the head of school, a kindergarten teacher, the Spanish teacher, the chief diversity officer, board member. It's hard work because in many ways we are all trying to do it for the first time. And what I mean for the first time is that, with what's been going on in our world, it's reestablishing itself in terms of a priority and a focal point. And we as schools and school leaders, we have to decide and understand how we're going to actually put all these pieces together. And it's not easy work, but it's work that I would say that in terms of what we owe our students, regardless of how old they are and what grades you serve, we owe our students that we're going to put our best foot forward to help them in this work, because they are about to enter into a world that is more diverse than anything that any of us have, knew in terms of us growing up. And so helping them and keeping this work at the center for them is going to be something that we all have to continue to have as a guiding principle in this work. And I think it starts at the top. I think it starts with boards. I tell my board this all the time. I think it starts with heads of schools. While we can't be in every space and in every room and so forth, our willingness to lean into this work is going to be important. And then it filters down into each individual in terms of what is in their toolkit, in terms of what trainings and what things can they do to continue to push and pull this work that is so important to our schools and both collectively as well as individually. And so as I think about this work, we continue to talk to schools. We continue to, one of the charges for Karen is to actually continue to work with schools outside of just our school, because I want schools to have the resources and the opportunities to continue this work where sometimes they don't. And so making ourselves an example of trying to do this work, I think is important. And again, we are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. So please don't hear that, oh my goodness, we've got it going on here. What I think we do is that we recognize our imperfections, and we're constantly working to try to better those imperfections. And we're not, we're not oblivious to the fact that we have them, and that helps us a lot. We can own our, the things that we do well, and we can admit and try to get better at the things that we don't do so well. And I think that that's an important piece. So as you're thinking about this work, again, I think you can lead from any space. I think that it's imperative that we do this work. And please know that, in doing this work, there will be both, ups and downs, but don't let that stop you from doing the work. It has to be done. It is of the utmost importance that we continue this work, because in many ways, the future of our society depends on this work.
And so we end with thanking you for your presence here on behalf of all the elephants that are actually living in our houses and the rest of our beautiful children. So I love the chats. Thank y'all for being with us. If you drop your email in the chat, what we'll do is not only give you all this information, but we'll get with Felicia and get some details. And then if, I've been bugging her about when's the next training? So we can send that out. And if there are some of us who want to go together, that would be awesome. So thank you. Thank you. We are here at Galloway, so you can find us. There's a lovely little thing, but it's typically a first initial, last name at gallowayschool.org. And so again, we wanted to just pay it forward because we've been lucky to be in partnership with so many of you as we make our schools better places, better spaces. So that's it.